morning, everyone. At least it's good morning for me. Maybe not so much for you, but in any case, the message is, again, time shall be no more. And this is a quote from Revelation, and it's a very strange quote. We're going to first look at how strange it is and what makes it strange, and then we're going to do some deep diving into even sciences and understand what this may be telling us. So it begins, as I said, with something odd that an angel says. And what's been happening in Revelation 10 up until this point is that the trumpets have been sounding, and immediately before the seventh trumpet sounds, things are being said about what will happen when the seventh trumpet sounds. And so that you would think of that perhaps as part of the sixth trumpet text, but it's really part of describing what's going to happen when the seventh trumpet sounds. And so this is what it says. It says, "And the angel whom I saw standing on sea and on dry land, raising his hand to heaven, and he swore by him who lives to the eternity of eternities, him who created heaven and that which is in it, and the earth and that which is in it. Again, time shall be no more." So what does the angel mean by this? Again, time shall be no more. That's an odd thing to say. What does he mean? And it's so strange, in fact, that the translator in the translation that I'm working from, left out the word again. He just said, well, that doesn't make any sense there. So he dropped it out. And so it was only by going back to the original text that it was possible to realize that that word was in there. And depending on which version you're working out from, you may have the same problem or even worse problems in the translation because people have been struggling with what does this mean? And so there are two odd parts to it. And the first part is time shall be no more. And literally understood, we say, how can this be? How could time cease to exist? What would that even mean? We have no concept for that. No one alive has ever known of a time when there was no time, which hardly makes any sense to even say. And then also what's odd about it is the second part, which is again. This means that there was a previous time or times when there was no time. Now, we're abusing the word time pretty badly here, but yes, that's what it seems to be saying. It's saying that we're going to return to be like a previous time when there wasn't any time. And so we're going to look at both of these odd pieces one at a time next. The first one we're going to look at is the time shall be no more part of it. And so we know that when the seventh trumpet sounds, a whole bunch of things are going to come to an end. There's lots of things that have been planning and going through there, and the Bible even says that. And so we know for sure that the time of waiting for the Messiah to come to return as the conquering king, that time is going to be over. We know that the end time period is over, so all of the seals and the trumpets and the woes, all that stuff is going to be complete, and so that's coming to an end. We know that all the prophecies of the Messiah's coming will be completed, so they're all going to be finished. And so we also know that the time of mankind's self-rule, that where man rules over himself, that's going to come to an end here too, because Jesus is going to become the ruler. So that a time of self-rule is coming to an end as well. So there's a bunch of things coming to an end, and that's not the whole list by any means. And so with the return of Jesus, there certainly are a lot of things coming to an end. But is that what this verse is really referring to? And looking at the wording of it, you'd have to say no. If you were going to say that a whole bunch of things are coming to an end, you wouldn't say it that way. You would say something different, and we'll actually see an example of that. And then when you look at a very direct translation of the verse, it says, that again, time shall not be. And so you just can't really misunderstand that. It is talking about time, and not only time, it's talking about an ongoing non-existence of time that will happen. And when you look up the words and the root words for them, you just can't get anywhere else but that. It's saying that time will cease to exist permanently, and there will never be another time when time exists. And these are all difficult concepts to explain. And so it's really talking about time and a change that's going to happen in time. And that change is that time will cease to exist. And we can get an example of how you would express it if you were trying to say something is coming to a completion, because that happens in the very next verse. After 10:6 that we were reading before comes 10:7, and it says, "But in the days of the seventh angel, when he shall sound, the mystery of God is completed." Okay, we get that. That thing is coming to an end, which he evangelized to his servants, the prophets. So that's how the Bible says, yeah, this is something that is going to be coming to an end here with the seventh, when the seventh trumpet is sounded. So we see a very big difference here in what we see with what's being said about time. It doesn't say that some period of time is going to be completed. It is saying time shall not be, it shall not exist. And so we don't see that with this other example here when it talks about the mystery of God is completed. It doesn't say it doesn't exist or it will cease to exist. What it says is completed. And we know that that's what happens at a whole bunch of things with the seventh trumpet, as we said. A whole bunch of things are going to come to an end or be completed. Same thing. So if time will cease to exist, what would that even be like? What is time? That really is the fundamental question. There is to understand what time would be like without time. You have to understand what time is, and the problem there is people and even scientists have very little understanding of what time really is. We know it shows up in the equations of motion that we have, and if you took high school physics or math, you almost certainly bumped into that. A little formula that says distance is equal to the velocity times time, okay, vt. So right embedded in these equations of motion, all of the things that we do, moving around, doing things like that, follow these equations of motion. And so if there was no time, would that mean we would all suddenly screech to a halt and not move? Well, no, time doesn't really seem to be that. Although the equations of motion are really fundamentally based on time, it seems like time is something that is not like that. It seems time should be something that you can go forward in or backward in. But that's not our experience. Our experience is that we only ever go in one direction. And Einstein, in fact, said we move through time at 1 second per second in one direction. And we don't go backwards in time. We only ever go forward. Now, we can slow down in time. If you start moving very quickly in the physical dimensions, then what you see is very quickly, I mean, approaching the speed of light. If you move at that speed in the physical dimensions, then what happens is your speed in the time dimension slows down, and it can slow down to almost zero, okay? But you can't ever go backward. There is no opportunity to go backward in time. And so, because of that, some scientists say that well, not because of that so much, but by other reasoning, scientists say that time may be the product of something called entropy. But that just brings us to a new question that we don't understand any better, and that is, what is entropy? And entropy is a very difficult thing to understand. A lot of people have misunderstood it, and it is a difficult concept to get a grasp of. And essentially, for the physical domain of the universe, it is a everlasting rule that there is increasing disorder in the universe. No matter what you do, it increases the disorder in the universe. And so the best way I can think of to explain this is by using an egg. So if you have a whole egg and it gets broken, that increases disorder in the universe. So the broken egg lying on your floor, splattered there, is in a greater state of disorder than it was when it was a whole egg with all of its contents all organized inside and everything like that. And so it was ordered more, and now that you've dropped it on the floor and broken it, you've increased disorder in the universe in a small way, of course, but yes. And so um, and that happens very naturally. We drop an egg, it breaks, and we expect it's going to break. And that's a very likely thing in our existence. But what we don't ever see is we don't ever see a broken egg becoming a whole egg again. And that is this increasing disorder that determines that. It says that um, because it increases disorder, it is very unlikely, and so unlikely that the chance of it is zero. And so you just don't ever see a broken egg becoming a whole egg again. You don't see it lifting up off the floor and all the pieces coming back together and up in the air holding it in your hand. That doesn't ever happen because that direction of travel in disorder is very unlikely. It's complicated to explain. So what this entropy really says is there is always this loss that's going to happen. No matter what you do, there always is going to be some kind of a loss of that. And you can never get out as much as you put into something. So that's why we can't have perpetual motion machines. There's always some loss associated with it that means that eventually things will run down, they will wear out, they will time out, they will fall apart. This is what entropy is all about. It is this, or over time, things become more and more disordered. And so, and entropy isn't a bidirectional thing. You can't ever, this is a rule you just can't break. And entropy says that you can't go backwards. You can't reduce entropy. You can do it in a small local area, but on the whole, the entropy of the universe always increases, and there isn't any option to do that. That's kind of the rule of entropy. And so this directionality of entropy seems to be what gives time its directionality also. So for the same reason that entropy always increases disorder, then time always goes in one direction. So those two are believed to be linked together. So, but what we seem to be talking about here is a different situation. What God is saying here in this message seems to be that time comes to an end. Now, what does God mean by time? Well, I'm sure he understands entropy and all these things a whole lot better than we do. And so I think he means time as we know it, as we understand it, comes to an end. And that would happen if entropy goes to zero. I'm not going to get into all the details of Boltzmann constants and stuff like that. But the idea there is that time as we know it would come to an end. And to us, that still doesn't mean a whole lot because we just don't understand what that would mean in our existence. If time didn't exist, now we're not saying time stops, we're saying time just doesn't exist anymore. What does that mean to our existence? Who knows? Hard to understand. We've never experienced it. So the angel says this time shall be no more thing. And so it seems to, as we've covered already, it seems to be speaking about time ceasing. And so time, we know, affects us in certain ways. And we know, as we've already been discussing, that time always moves in one direction. You can't go backwards. You can't stop. You can slow down. I talked about that with what Einstein said. You can do some slowing down there, but you can't get to the point of stopping. So time for us in our experience is always in one direction, and we've never known anything else besides that. And the other thing that we understand from what we just talked about is you can never get back everything that you put in. There's always going to be some wasted effort, something lost in there that you can't ever go back and get. And that is really the fundamental of what is entropy. And so those two things are our experience of time. And so is this what the angel said would be no more? Are these things going to come to an end? Is time going to be bidirectional? Are we going to have a time when there will be no wasted effort in anything that we do? And does that make sense? And that kind of leads us to the second part that was really odd about what the angel said, and that was the word again. And so that implies that there was a time when entropy and time didn't exist. And we understand entropy and time to be linked now. And so here's this a time when time didn't exist, question mark. And yeah, Bible students with a background in engineering have noticed for some time that the consequences of the original sin in the Garden of Eden um, resulted in God cursing the ground, he says, and talks about what the penalty is going to be for that original sin. And a lot of people say, this sounds a little bit like entropy, like God has suddenly added entropy into the universe. So here's what it says from Genesis 3, verses 17 through 19. It says, "Cursed is the ground because of you. In toil, work, wait, effort, you will eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall grow for you. And you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you will eat bread, till you return to the ground, because from it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return." So God seems to be saying there is that the result of their sin is going to be that they're going to have to work harder than they would have had to before. Life is going to be difficult in everything that they do to sustain themselves, to sustain their existence is going to be harder than it was before. And remember that at this point, they haven't been kicked out of the garden yet. That happens a little bit later on, at least in the text. And so it seems like at this time already, this change has happened where things are going to be difficult. So summarizing all of this, if entropy did begin after the original sin, and that seems to make some sense, then it also makes sense that it would end when Jesus returns, because this whole original sin and the consequences of that sin is everything about what the Bible is about. That first sin is um, and rectifying the damage that was done by that first sin is what it's all about. That's why we have a Redeemer. That's why we have Jesus. That's why everything is in place. All of these things are all to do with dealing with that original sin and the consequences of that.